Hi, so today I want to talk about writing synchronicity. So synchronicity is a word that was developed by the psychiatrist Carl Jung, and he describes synchronicity as deeply meaningful coincidences which mysteriously occur in your life. So what we're talking about are coincidences that just seem a little bit too coincidental to be true. But they are. But, it depends, I guess, on whether or not you believe that everything is interconnected and there's a meaning behind things, or whether or not you feel that there is no meaning and everything is random chance. So either way, there's little moments that make you stop and go, So the reason that I said that I was going to do a video on this is because often when I start to write, really weird things start to happen. And I just wanted to share with you two of the weirdest or two of the strangest that have always kind of stuck with me. One is from the first novel that I ever had published, Angorichina, and the other one is from the novel that I'm writing at the moment now. So I was just going to share these with you so that we can all just revel in the weirdness. So the first novel that I have published was the second novel that I ever wrote, and it was called Angorichina, and it was about a tuberculosis sanatorium in South Australia in the 1930s. Now, I got the inspiration from this because in my early 20s I travelled around Australia for a year with a friend, and we sort of started in Melbourne, went up through Canberra to Sydney, hired a car, drove across the Nullarbor to West Australia, stayed there for quite a while, and then to finish off we ended up going up to Alice Springs, down through the Red Centre, and then to Adelaide and then home. And when you come down through the Red Centre, you end up at a place called the Flinders Ranges, which is a mountain range. And in this mountain range, there is a sheep station which used to be used as a tuberculosis sanatorium. So up until about the 1940s, there was no cure for tuberculosis for consumption. And once antibiotics had been invented around about 1940, then after that it was fine. You took a pill or two and you were well again. But up until that point, that turning point in history, it was 50-50. It could be a death sentence, or you could end up going home, and if you went home you could end up back in the sanatorium again. And it was quite horrible. There were a lot of awful treatments that people underwent. If one of your lungs was severely infected and the other one was quite healthy, they would crack the ribs down the front of your body to compress the lung that was infected, in the hopes that the one that was okay would be able to keep going and recover, which was an absolutely horrific thought. But that's the wonders of today, of modern medicine, that if you get tuberculosis you've got a good chance of survival. But anyway, that was my cheerful first book, because we stayed for a few nights. This sheep station, this ranch station, is now actually a backpackers, and you can go and stay there. And it's a really incredible place. It's beautiful scenery, middle of nowhere, but also with quite a haunting history to it. And it was very much that, as we were sitting there that night around the campfire, eating our food before bed, and you just felt like you kind of felt like you weren't alone. It had a very a feel to it that the walls were watching, and that kind of always just stuck with me. And so I set this novel Angorichina at Angorichina Station, and it's about 4 patients who will basically end up there and how their lives turn out. And of course it makes for quite an interesting story, I think it does, because you're sick, you get sent to this place, to a sanatorium, where you're surrounded by people that you've never met before, complete strangers from every walk of life, every background, and you can't leave. So any dramas that play out, they stay in that place, and you've got to find ways to get on with the people around you, as you're all sitting there either waiting to go home or waiting to die, and you don't know. and I just thought that was a kind of a very interesting concept. So anyway, I did a lot of research for this. I do a lot of research for my historical fiction, and there was always one book that I'd heard about, but I couldn't find. So I can't remember when I was writing this. Hold on. So this was published in 2011. I think I wrote it. I was writing it in Rwanda, I guess. So I was probably writing it around 2008. So there wasn't so much on the internet back then, as much as there probably is now. And so I found it very difficult to find this one piece of research, which was a short story by Somerset Maugham called The Sanatorium. And Somerset Maugham is a very, very famous, prolific English short story writer. And I've put a link to the full text below, but I couldn't find it online at that time. And I knew that it was a short story about living in a sanatorium around about the same time in history that I was writing my own, so sort of 1930. So it wasn't until I got back to the UK and around about the time that the book had been accepted for publication that I went to visit my friend Graham in Bath, and we were just wandering around the town and going in and out of shops, and we went into this charity shop, and all of a sudden there on the shelf I find 65 published stories by Somerset Maugham, and I think it was something like £3, and inside there I found a copy of The Sanatorium. So we went back to his house and he was making breakfast, and I was sitting down in the living room with this book, and all Graham could hear from the kitchen was me effing and blinding and just cursing as I read each page. And it's a very, very short story, only, a few pages, like 3,000-4,000 words, very short. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. And when I show you, you'll understand why I was quite worried, because my book was already tabled for publication, and here I was reading this. So it started off kind of innocuous. So in Maugham's story, he had a lead female protagonist who he described as a pretty girl with red hair and bright blue eyes. Now, in my own story, I had a sort of an ingenue who also had flame red hair and a simple cut blue dress. So, nothing too major there. We just both honed in on the same female character having similar physical traits. Red hair, blue eyes. All right, no problem, moving on. So in Maugham's story, he also has a character called the General. So she sat at the same table as MacLeod and Campbell, together with an old general who had been put there on account of his rank. Now, one of my side characters in Angorichina is also the General. I seated myself down with Joe and the General and tucked into boiled eggs and toast. As a joke, the kitchen staff always cut the General's toast into soldiers. Okay, well, that's not that surprising really. I mean, we're both writing about a very similar period in time. It's very likely that there will be old military personnel sort of wandering around the facility. To have a general in there, fine, not a big thing. So in Maugham's story, he has two characters called MacLeod and Campbell, and they're elderly gentlemen, and they spend the entire story making each other's lives miserable. And he says, it's queer, isn't it, that two middle-aged men should think it worthwhile to make life hell for one another. Okay, so I also had two characters, Joe Siren and Sean Buchanan, two elderly men who were basically making each other's lives hell throughout the entire book. just kind of didn't get on, personality clashes, petty jealousies, and just spent the entire book riling one another up. And one of them ends his life in a very similar way to the way in which one of Morm's old men ends his life. But okay, all right, I could live with that. I could go, you know, that's just simple coincidence. His short story, my novel, you know, they both kind of share a couple of similarities. And then it got really specific. So the point at which I just sort of put it down and shook my head in disbelief. In Morm's story, he has a character called Templeton. So, oh look, there's Major Templeton, said Miss Bishop, a smile lighting up her blue eyes. And I also have a Templeton in my story. There were only two people in the car. The first was Mr. Templeton, the man responsible for collecting those coming to Angorichina. And that just kind of really hit me. You know, I mean, we're not talking about a Smith or a Jones or a really common name here. We're talking very, very specific name, Templeton. And I just felt really worried at that point because, you know, there I was waiting for my book to come out and suddenly I find this short story and I'm thinking, you know, if anybody has read Sanatorium and then they read this, they're going to think it's too similar to be true. And I honestly, I was really just, what can you do at that point? And my friend came in and he looked at me and he said, you know, what's the matter? What's up? And I explained what I was reading and he looked at me and went, you know, maybe you're channeling the spirit of Somerset Maugham. And I just thought, well, I wish he had something fresh to say. You know, a little bit of originality now would go down quite well. But anyway, that's what I kind of mean by synchronicities. Things that are so specifically weird. And that was really just a prelude to what's happened more recently. So I set off to write the story of Enheduanna, who is the first known poet, author in history. And she was the daughter of Sargon the Great, who was the first man who ever founded an empire. So I started off writing her story, but in order to get to her story, I found that I also had to start writing Sargon's story. So it's now turned into two books, the first of which is about Sargon and the second of which will be about Enheduanna. And things got really strange. So I knew that I wanted to write about Enheduanna. I'd been fascinated by her for a very long time and I thought this would make an amazing historical fiction work. So off I went to research Enheduanna. Now, although we're talking about around 4,000 years ago, we do know what Enheduanna looked like very roughly. So this is a disc, a restored disc, that was dug up in in modern-day Iraq, but in those days Mesopotamia. And it shows the high priestess of a temple conducting a ceremony. So that lady in the middle is known to be Enheduanna. Sure, great. So what's the interesting point here? Well, the interesting point here is that the disc was discovered in 1927. It was dug up by an archaeologist called Sir Leonard Woolley. Now, Woolley is my name. Now, as far as I know, having read this biography, I don't think we're related. It's just a name. But I found that really a little bit weird. But again, I don't think that there's any actual link between Sir Leonard Woolley and our branch of Woolleys. But then, so the final creepy part of this is that Sir Leonard Woolley died on February the 20th, 1960. And I was born on February the 20th. Different year, same date. So, you know, it's those kind of weird little coincidences that just start to pile up when I begin to write a novel. And I don't know, I'm not sure if I take that as a good sign or just randomness. I like it. I like that sort of sense of weird interconnectedness, even if it is just complete random chance. But those are my two biggest synchronicities so far. The first one, I mean, Templeton, if it was just the name Templeton, I don't think it would have bothered me. But the fact that, you know, we'd had so many other similarities between that very short story and my novel. And then this one, you know, the main character that I'm about to write about, and the only image of her was discovered by a man with my surname who died on the same day I was born. And I just sort of sit there and go, you know, okay. Okay. So anyway, I guess maybe it's a good sign, because I went on to win the Near Eastern Prize writing about Enhadwana. But again, maybe it is just synchronicities. So what are the weirdest things that have happened to you when you started writing? What has just been like too coincidental to be comfortable? Share your synchronicities.